Okay, so let's start on Western types of religion and religious practices. So when we look at Western religions, when right now what we're thinking about in this particular mini lecture and for World Civ are religions that are related to each other in the Western world, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, Western religions are linear. They're linear. Now, you will see with my wonderful artwork here our life cycle. Okay, so it's a linear life cycle. So we're born, we're babies, we're toddlers, and then we're kids, and then we're teenagers, and we know everything. Then we become adults, and we're afraid of everything. Not necessarily. Then we become old, and that's when we really realize that we don't know much about anything at all. And comes a little too late, that knowledge, because then we die. That is a linear life cycle. And when you die, after you die, you either go to heaven, or you go to hell. Here it is, hell. That's the devil. This is an angel. These are my little angel wings here. Okay? So, really great artwork. Just want you to know that, I really work hard on my artwork, as you can plainly see. All right, so where do these concepts come from? Because they have history behind them. Nothing happens in a bubble. So where do we get these concepts that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam grow from the influences of? So in the 500s BCE, at the same time as Cyrus the Great, we have two folks. One's name is Zoroaster or Zarathustra, but because that second name is a little hard to pronounce, we're just going to go with Zoroaster. Zoroaster and Xenophanes. Xenophanes is Greek. Zoroaster is in Persia. Now, both of these guys come up with the concept of one God, the first monotheistic belief system. Mono meaning one, theism meaning God. Okay, monotheistic. Now, they're both a little bit different, but both are synchronized, and they influence. They take on characteristics within the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim principles. How do they do that? Well, let's look at Zoroaster. We'll look at Xenophanes another time. In another lecture on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam later in the semester. So here we have Zoroaster's viewpoint, Zoroastrianism, from around 500 BCE. Here we have a circle. It's still linear like this, but you see that there's a line here in the middle of this circle, and on that line is a human being. And a human being, Zoroaster thought, is always on the precipice of making and having to balance their inner desires, their emotional intelligence with their rational intelligence. So they are trying to, we live every day, human beings. I don't care where you are, you live every day with like micro conflicts within yourself. Should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? We rationalize why we should as opposed to why we shouldn't. What's our narrative? What do we really want to do? How do we reconcile what we really want to do with what we know we should or shouldn't do? These are like micro conflicts that every day we deal with. And so Zoroaster says that's the balancing act. That's like the balance being between good and evil, good and bad. This is something that we do every day. Zoroaster said at the top, when we do make good choices, we're looking at the light. We're looking at goodness is also equal to light. And at the top, the God who rules over the world of the light, the good name is Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda. And between the realm of people and the realm of the heavens where Ahura Mazda lives, there are seven beings. They're intermediaries. They're intermediaries between the human world and the heavenly world. And those we have synchronized into Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and they have become the angels. Now, you could also make bad decisions, and that means you're going to the dark side, right? For all of our Star Wars fans, we're going to the dark side. It's become a euphemism because of Star Wars, but the idea still remains the same. So we're making the bad choice, we're making the evil choice. So we go to the dark side. There are seven intermediaries between the human world and the God that rules over the dark world. And those are demons, and the name of the God in the dark world is Ahura Mazda. Also, Ahriman. But just like there's a name for the devil, there's all kinds of names that we have for our concept of the devil. So this whole way of looking at the world has been incorporated into Judaic theory initially. Why did it get incorporated and synchronized with Judaic concepts of God and good and evil? For a couple reasons. First of all, let's look at the world in general. We know that people make choices every day, and some of those choices are good, and some of those choices are bad. And, pretty early on, we know what are good choices and what are bad choices. As life gets more complicated and more complex, it takes experience, it takes failure to really understand what ramifications are, what their consequences could be of some of the choices we make. But we do know from pretty early on it's not appropriate to lie, cheat, and steal. You shouldn't murder people. You shouldn't be mean to animals. I mean, there's some basic concepts and understandings that we have. And we get them because we don't want people to do that to us. So it's not really a stretch for us to innately kind of understand those ideas of what is good and what is bad. Now, how they are associated with light and dark, that's a far more complex conversation that brings in this concept of Gnosticism, but that goes into religion that we're not going to cover in world civilization. Still, we have to really get a feel for where does this come from, where does this synchronization coming in, taking on characteristics of other religious practices into one's own. Well, in 570, the Persians, Chaldeans came in and they took over Judea. Now, before that, the Akkadians or the Assyrians came in and they took over the northern part of Israel. Now, when we get into really understanding, when we get later on the semester, we're talking about Islam, I'll do a lecture where we're looking at all three of these religions in a far more in-depth way. But for our purposes, just know that that area that was called the Levant, which is modern-day Israel, was conquered by two groups of people. The first group came in the 700s, the late 700s BCE, and they took over all of the northern part of Israel, which would be Samaria. And then in the 500s, the southern part, which would be Judea, was taken over. and it started what was called the Babylonian exile, and that was the very first disbursement of people who practice what I would call proto-Judaism, like Israelite religion. And where were they banished? Well, they were banished to what becomes Persia. They're banished to Babylon. And Babylon is going to become part of the capital of the Persian Empire, one of the many large cities in Persia. And so that influence, and this is happening in the 500s at the time that Zoroaster is also very much alive, and the priests and the aristocratic and the wealthy families that are banished from Judea over to Babylon, they are introduced to these concepts by Zoroaster. And so it makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense. This kind of idea that we're in these micro conflicts with ourselves, and how do we reconcile with that? Okay, and it is really relatively easy to be incorporated or synchronized into an existing concept of a faith that believes in that you don't lie, cheat, and steal. Okay, and that every day we have to make choices. And Judaism is very much a religion where God holds the people who practice Judaism accountable for their own behavior, very much accountable for their own behavior. So that walking on that fine line, you making that choice, God holds you accountable. The God of the Jews, which is the same God, by the way, of Christians and Muslims, but the way Judaism is practiced, their concept of God is not a God that says, oh, you believe in me, you're forgiven. No, you have personal responsibility here, and you're making choices that you are going to have to feel the consequences of yourself. And I'm not, in here to say, oh, it's all good. So this is very much the Zoroastrian model of belief system is very much incorporated into this linear idea of in Western religions, because once you die, these ideas of where you're going, heaven or hell, are easily also incorporated with Christian concepts of good and evil and heaven and hell. So in our next video, we're going to look at Eastern religions and that they are cyclical. But keep this in mind. You can go back to it and refer to this when we begin talking about when we look and compare and contrast Judaism, Christianity, and Islam when we're covering the chapter in Islam. Okay? All right, everybody. Remember, I'm around if you need me. I'll see you in a minute. Bye.